In a year when Democrats are betting big and outraising Republicans, the GOP still has an ace to play for the midterms, a $600 million ace. The New York Times reporting that groups aligned with the Republican Party have more than $843 million in the bank, compared to just $243 million on the Democratic side. So how will that money be spent? Well, after Democrats scored a big redistricting win in Virginia, folks on both sides argue you can't go hard enough.
You think we're playing by conventional rules? You think Donald Trump's in the White House because he's a conventional politician? Your conventional politician is Glenn Youngkin. And look what he's done. Defeat after defeat. Now it's a crushing. Now they turned over the whole frickin' state to him. It'll take us a decade to dig out of this. A decade of those grassroots going door to door.
What do you make of Republicans saying that Virginia, you guys getting, Democrats getting 10 for 1 is totally unconstitutional and wrong?
What they're just mad at is that they have been accustomed to a Democratic Party that rolls over, doesn't fight, and takes everything sitting down. The Republican Party doesn't like the fact that they are fighting against someone who actually will stand up for the American people.
Teddy Schleifer is behind that reporting for the New York Times. He's also an MS Now contributor. MS Now political analysts are here as well. Host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, Basil Smikle. So, Teddy, tell us about all this money.
Sure. It's a good time to be a Republican outside group. There's a pretty significant advantage that Republican committees that are raising money for the Senate and the House candidates have over their Democratic counterparts. Also, the Republican National Committee has about $120 million advantage over the Democratic National Committee. Now, money isn't everything here, and Democratic candidates historically have done better at raising money than Republican candidates. But, you know, this is definitely a jump ball financially for the parties here. I know there's a lot of enthusiasm among liberals about candidates like James Tallarico or Roy Cooper in North Carolina. But the reality is a lot of Republicans groups are going to have an advantage and that can neutralize kind of the advantages the Democratic candidates have.
So, Basil, Democratic senators have been breaking fundraising records. He mentioned James Tallarico. He raised an unprecedented $27 million in the first quarter for his Texas Senate bid. So what is this about? Is it about a rejection of Democrats, which clearly, if you look at individuals, it's not? Or is it a rejection of what people see as the Democratic power structure, which clearly they weren't so happy about after the last campaign?
Well, I think it's two things. You'll see a lot of the big money being spent in some of those marquee races like Tallarico and Ossoff, for example. But I think Democrats have a different theory of their political mobilization. A lot of small dollar donors to actually take advantage of the anti-Trump enthusiasm that is on the left. However, they've got another path that they actually have to be mindful of. How do they cobble together a new Democratic political coalition? Because yes, Democrats are very engaged, but there are also a lot of independents who seem to be leaving Donald Trump.
But here's my question. Yeah. Why is the DNC so far behind the RNC?
Well, that's why I say I think it's a different political theory of mobilization, that historically there has been a reliance on big donors. There have also been a reliance on very expensive consultants. But the energy of the party right now is very different. It is focused on a lot of small dollar donations. Bernie Sanders did that. Mamdani in some of these smaller races around the country, Mamdani's example, he's done that. So there's been this movement away from big donors and big money PACs because they want to get the corporate influence out of it. Well, I think a lot of the younger, more progressive voters. And the reality is...
So they're giving to individuals as opposed to, say, something that either the DNC or some organization they see as representing big D Democratic.
It's a movement away from the, quote, institution and the establishment.
Okay. Yeah. Tim, in an era of viral moments and Trump dominating the headlines, I wonder, when you look at these numbers, what can money buy and what can't it?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think you'll be shocked to hear this, Chris, as an ex-political consultant. I think that a lot of political consultants and TV ad men overstate the value of these big money super PACs. A lot of guys are going to be getting beach houses thanks to, particularly in the Republican ad side, thanks to all the money going into these super PACs. What they're not able to do is distort the reality that people are experiencing in the economy. And so, for every 30-second ad that tells you about the things Trump supposedly did, that is offset every time somebody goes to the gas station or the grocery store and their bill is higher. And so, there's a limited efficacy to these TV ads in this day and age, or the digital ads for that matter. The one thing that I think it can do, and where this is going to be really important, where the Republicans have raised a lot of money, is they can go into the red states where the Democrats are looking to get pickups and really smear and attack their Democratic opponents and make them seem out of step with the values of Republican voters in red states. The Democrats, just frankly, to win the Senate, are going to have to win in Iowa, Ohio, Florida, Texas, someplace like that, where Donald Trump won a lot. And you're going to have to win over some Trump voters, some conservative voters, some MAGA voters. And I think the Republicans are spent a lot of money convincing those voters that those Democrats like Tallarico are too extreme, too on the left. And I think that may work in the context of those red states.
So, Teddy, you have said the Republican Party shouldn't get too excited about having more cash. But I wonder, as you were doing this deep dive into where the money is, was there one big takeaway that you had in terms of what this might mean for the midterms and beyond?
Sure. I mean, I think we're right now talking about the party committees and the super PACs. I think, the super PACs aligned with the House and Senate leadership. I think the X factor here is basically the $230 million that is stockpiled in super PACs supported by the crypto and AI industries, which are probably also going to have a Republican lean, at least, to their spending. So these are kind of, not traditional players in midterms or in presidential cycles, but the crypto and AI industries have decided they really care a lot about politics. They really want to get their people in. And I think that's going to even further bolster kind of the conservative movement this cycle. So, going forward, they could do it again, 2028, 2030, 2032, depending on how things go this November. So, look, there's a lot of wealthy billionaires who are conservative, and they seem to be mobilizing first or more aggressively than kind of the wealthy billionaires who are liberal.
Yeah, something to look out for. So big picture, Tim, when you look ahead to the midterms and beyond, the question, obviously, of whether money can make up for political headwinds, it's interesting that very recently someone just said to me, I voted, and they wrote in a name for president last time because they saw an ad that, frankly, I think was probably a lie about Kamala Harris, but it landed. So when you talk about them going into red districts, but going into red districts to defend a seat that they should not have to spend money on is different than being able to pick up seats in contested districts. Anyway, that's a very long question without an answer, or a very long statement without a question. But how do you put all that together?
Yeah. Like I said, I think that when you have one of these wave years and you look at the big kind of midterm elections, we've seen one party gain a bunch. I think about 2006. I was a Republican back then. I was a young whippersnapper working on a campaign, and I was working on a campaign that was going to be like a prime pickup for Republicans that year. And we ended up only losing by 2 points, and it turned out the Republicans didn't pick up a single seat that year in a democratically held district. You saw the same thing in 2010 for flipping at the other side. In 2018, in the first Trump midterm, the Republicans didn't pick up seats anywhere. So I do think there's just limited efficacy to what this money can do when voters are upset with what's happening in the country, what's happening with this administration and the economy and how it's affecting them. So that takes me back to the Senate again. I think the House is off the table for the Republicans. They're going to figure out how to spend this money in the Senate. If it was a better year, maybe you spend it in Georgia, Michigan, traditional swing states, and I think they'll still try. But I think the Democrats are in very good shape in those places, and the Republicans end up putting a bunch of this money into your Iowas and Ohios and Texases to try to save their Senate majority.
So I'll ask you a question I've never asked you before, which is to pretend you're a Republican consultant. I can't imagine anybody who is less likely to be, well, maybe a few who are less likely. But can you take a good candidate, a a strong message and a willingness to go against Donald Trump and turn that to your advantage if everything that you just heard from Tim is true?
Well, I think it speaks to the Republican advantage to some extent over Democrats, which is a centralized message. The centralized message really is centered around Donald Trump and what Republicans are doing in Washington. Now, I agree that I acknowledge that there are pieces of the Trump coalition that are leaving him. But if you look at where Republicans are, they are still in lockstep with this president. The independents perhaps not, but the Republicans are. So if you could find a way, in my view, to sort of to cleave the independent piece of it, I don't know if you can, but just focus on the Republican base, because a lot of them are still very much behind Donald Trump. So to Tim's point, that's you put all that money there. Don't focus on the high-priced consultants, which there are on both sides, but you hammer home that message of sort of we got to stick together because the other side is worse.
Teddy Schleifer, Tim Miller, Basil Smikle, thank you guys.